So my name's Jeremy, and this is kind of the Dungeons and Dragons village. I didn't have like a super great name for it because this started as a concept where I wanted to make a board game for Dungeons and Dragons with the Legos that I had. So I built the wall first, and then I started filling it in with dungeons, and you can kind of see a cutscene there with like this giant spider attacking a D&D group in this little room. And so the idea here is that this build is really meant to be played with for D&D.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So let's start at kind of the main section first, and then we'll kind of dive into the caverns below.
Sure. Now, one thing that you might notice immediately is that a lot of the architecture in this particular build was inspired by the blacksmith set that came out in early of 2021. The closest thing to that you can see here is that green building over there. I swapped out the roof tiles for green ones to make it as different as I could. But the other buildings, I mimicked the architecture because that was really the first set that was built to that scale. If you look at the medieval market set or the old medieval blacksmith set, most medieval buildings are just way, way smaller. And that was the first one that Lego had ever come out with that was, really kind of full size compared to the other ones. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of race ahead and use that same style to recreate a whole city. So, the first thing that looked like is buying like 6 of those blacksmith sets and then, swapping out some of the tiles. So you can see that there's an unfinished blacksmith, and you've got a couple workers in there putting it together. They haven't painted it yet, so you can kind of see like the under brick that the other sets hint at. And then there's a double blacksmith set that's really supposed to be the tavern for the town. So this is where like your D&D adventurers would meet and get their quests and stay the night in the town or whatever. I thought that would be the easiest build to just do a double build, but it ended up taking almost 20 hours because there wasn't like a really clear way to mesh 2 sets together.
You couldn't just smash them into each other.
Well, I kind of tried. So I did that with the base, and then the next floor, and I didn't really have a plan for the roof, so I was just like crossing my fingers and hoping. So like every sequential floor got harder. I was able to like get a little bit more creative as I went. So on the other side, we have a stables. So that's got a couple subroofs to it. Really, they're built so they can all have interiors, and the Lego people can move from place to place. And then we also have a barracks on this side, and here you can see this town doesn't have a keep or a big castle or a huge army, which is kind of why you need to have a Dungeons and Dragons adventure group. They don't have a king and a huge army to solve all their problems. So we've got one of the knights here. He's training new recruits to fill the ranks of the soldiers, and we've got one of the higher ups kind of looking on from the pile of barrels over there, making sure everything's done right. But this building was really meant to kind of imitate kind of like an Age of Empires barracks, where the building serves a military purpose, kind of overlooking this gate here. So you have like a little archer. He's kind of hanging out in there. The gatehouse works. The drawbridge can actually get pulled up with a crank, and the portcullis. Bless my heart. It can be shut down. So I can shut this down here, and then there's a crank that can get turned to roll it up. And if you want, I can get in here and do that. So there's just a little crank in here. It'll pull the chain, which will eventually, once the slack is out of the chain, it'll pull up the drawbridge. So there it goes.
Perfect. So lots of play functions as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you want a gate that closes because that's the only thing that's going to keep the town safe from outside invasion, right? So I'm really actually happy with how the cobblestone turned out. Because we have the snow plates underneath, so you can kind of see the cement beneath the cobblestone, and then you got some grass and stuff poking out through it. The stables is right by the entry gate, because that's where you'd park your horses, right? But the way the town is designed is the whole thing is modular. This whole town can be rebuilt and restructured 100 different ways. So, like, for example, over here, that's another cutscene there with the troll. And there's a big epic fight going, and that would be like a D&D party, right? So that's a boss room. but you could redesign it where, any of the existing pieces can get slid around and moved, back or forth. You can move buildings. You can swap buildings out. So part of why it's done this way is if you had a D&D group for this particular build, if you changed out some of the buildings, you can even change the size of the whole thing, and you can have a different town for a different game, right? So if you have like a really iconic church or a really iconic castle or a really iconic building for that particular play day, you can take one of the other buildings out, you can swap that one in, you can even rearrange all the dungeons below, and have a totally different experience the next time you play, just kind of like a Settlers of Catan board. In fact, the walls, this was done first. It was built where it's easy to transport, easy to take apart, so they all just kind of clip into each other. And it's a very simple build. I made them this way because it was easy and it was cheap. I might upgrade the walls at some point so you don't see this nice line of brown for the walkway. But they all clip into each other, so you can make the town bigger or smaller. Here you have kind of a secret entrance, right, into the sewers. So this might be where your characters will come in, and they'll start their adventure down here. And then, we can, of course, take this whole marketplace off. It had to get built in such a way where I could take it all apart pretty easily. So here you have, the entrance to the sewers or the canals underneath the town. So I've got some mermaids over there. You might make your way in with a boat or make your way out, in an emergency escape. I'll go through the rest of the dungeon here with you guys. The dungeon was designed to be a little bit generic on purpose. So, there isn't a given room that has to be a treasury room. There isn't a given room that has to be, the mortuary. There isn't a given room that has to be any specific room. It's designed with as much flexibility as possible in mind. So again, you have replay value and you can redo different scenarios with the same board pieces. And that's kind of the hallmark of just about any board game you can think of is, you kind of have this loose skeletal structure, and then, you can
build off of that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So let's take a look at the church here. The church is actually the most different build in the whole town from the blacksmith. I kind of use the pentagonal tile roof style, just so the whole style of the town matches. But everything comes apart. So, if you come in here, there's a banshee up in the rafters. In fact, there's an entrance with a spiral staircase that goes up into the attic because I wanted the minifigures to be able to actually, walk everywhere within the town. There's only one building that really breaks that rule, and I'll probably go back and fix it at some point. But if you look inside the church here, you'll see pews, you'll see a sacrament table. I had some Tuscan Raiders in there that I forgot I put in there, but I guess they're going to church while everyone else is doing their thing.
The stained glass windows are really fantastic as well.
Yeah, I had fun with that. I wanted to kind of have like a really tall feeling to the main chapel. If you look over on the opposite side, you can see a spiral staircase that goes all the way to the top of the church. And this actually comes off for easy transportation, but it's a spiral staircase that goes all the way to the top of the entire thing.
So all of your adventurers can actually make their way around.
That's exactly. It was fun to make a really tall spiral staircase. It was just kind of tricky to make it structurally sound. But one thing that's fun about this church is if you look at the pulpit and you knock it down, it gives you a secret entrance into the caverns below. And I was able to do that using kind of like the tiny base plates to go around the bottom. So I created this hole there. So, in one of the Dungeons and Dragons scenarios, the entrance into the dungeons is through the church, and that's where all the monsters are coming in to the town from at night. In fact, here's a goblin bandit to kind of capture that idea, sneaking around the church, because, that's the way in and out of the catacombs beneath. So if you look down here, there's the generic unfilled rooms I was telling you about. They can be filled with anything. They can have a monster encounter. It can have treasure. It could just be a simple hallway. But I believe that there are 29 rooms underneath this particular build. And again, with how it's designed with the wall pieces, this is a 3x4 build, or 3 base plates by 4 base plates. It could be expanded by 4x4 or a 4x5. It could be a 2x8. There's a lot of different shapes that would be acceptable for it to be. The dungeon didn't get quite as much work as the upper city. I used a lot of black and white pieces because I had a lot of black and white pieces. If I were to do it again, I'd probably use a little bit more gray. But I tried to mix it in there a little bit. Point being, the dungeon can really absorb a lot of extra pieces because the sheer volume of pieces the dungeon requires is just enormous. You gotta factor that half the pieces for this build are underneath where you can't really see it.
Yeah, but it's great, and you use that tile system as well, so it's very easy to move stuff around.
Yes, so nothing is locked in. In fact, the whole dungeon can be moved around and pulled out. In fact, I might do that for you here in just a minute. I just need to find a place to set my church. So this dungeon here, we can move the streets. And the idea is that if you're here with the D&D group, y'all might be seated at the table. And as you say, oh, let's go through that door, you would reveal that part of the dungeon by taking the building off. Okay. So instead of having like a tablecloth or something to kind of hide the full scale of the dungeon from your group, you're using the buildings themselves to do that. And that's part of why it's important for the buildings to be structurally sound. You don't want to be breaking your buildings as you're, going through it. One thing that occurred to me when I was maybe a third of the way through is that all the buildings have to kind of fit within their 32 by 32 base plate, so they all fit nicely with each other. The first building that I made, which is the double blacksmith, actually broke that rule. It sticks out a little bit. So I have less flexibility with that building versus all of the other buildings. But, that's kind of one of those mistakes you make as you go. I might end up correcting those chimneys a little bit just so it's not a big deal. But, this guy will come right off. And I'll have to find a place to set him, too. Careful, that one's very fragile. Yeah, the incomplete one is going to fall apart really quick. So again, you can come through this dungeon. These guys might retreat away from the arachnids this way. If you look in the wall pieces themselves, some of them will have like secret entrances in or out of the dungeon, which can or cannot be used in a given game. So, any one of these doors can be blocked off with gates. Just like, say, for example, this is a good example over here of what a play might be on this. So we have the prisoner in here. He's got a candle. He's rotting away with his mice. And, on any given, I've got a gate here, and I've got bars here, and they have to rescue him. But if I took all those things away, it's just another one of these rooms. So, it can be a dungeon. You can have a whole skeletal army in here. This is more meant as like a boss fight room, so you have lots of space to fight whatever the bigger monster is. One thing that I did for this, with the intent of doing it as a game, is we got all the different monsters we could with Legos, and we put them in a big box. So I kind of have this Dungeon Master box where I can summon different, it's like, okay, we're fighting orcs, or we're fighting goblins, or we're fighting, trolls, or, we have spiders or snakes, or, depending on the level or skill of the adventurers. We'll just reveal a little bit more dungeon over here. So this is the tavern. The interior isn't 100% done yet, but the idea is that you come in here for quests. And all of these can be, taken apart in a way that, allows for play inside the buildings as well as beneath the dungeons. So, you might...
Got a helper over here now to make sure we can get it all apart.
Yeah. So, Yeah, the heaviest building is the church, just because it breaks the rules a little bit, and that it's a double. So it's 1 by 2 base plates, whereas everything else is just one. One is a little bit easier because you're not getting so heavy that you can't just easily move it without there being too much damage. There's a little bit of a lip right here because of the 2 tables this whole thing is sitting on, but it's meant to be flat. So, they don't really clip into each other. It's all just gravity and friction holding the entire dungeon together. So, any other parts that you guys want to see? We've just about dismantled the entire town here.
No, it's very impressive. So it's great that you're able to show everything underneath there.
Let's see if we can get to the rest of the dungeon. Let's see if we have enough space. So again, like the dungeon pieces are interchangeable, so you can pull them up pretty easily. If I wanted these rooms to be different, I could change it out. I could have a hallway, or make it so I could do this. And it's designed to be structurally sound, no matter how it's pointed, as far in terms of holding the weight from the upper parts. This is another boss room over here. So let's see here. So here we've got different doors. You can put bars on the doors. I tried to put as many as little connectors and holders as I could in the rooms, just so the rooms could be versatile later, and I wouldn't have to deconstruct too much. If we were going to do a game throughout this whole thing, I'd probably put, barriers just to let people know that those aren't really exits, and you can kind of guide your D&D group however you want through the different mazes. So yeah, this is the canal that goes underneath, but you don't necessarily have to have the canal. This whole thing can be taken up and moved and changed. Part of the idea with this build is to have 5 or 6 base plates outside of the build that I can swap in or swap out, just so I can surprise whoever's coming through with new content and new things. And I can do that without necessarily rebuilding the entire town. I can change a couple buildings, I can change the dungeon around a little bit, and it's a stage, right? So you can reuse the same stage for a lot of different scenes, a lot of different adventures.
Have you had a chance to actually play a D&D game through here yet?
So this one was done about a week before this event. So we started scripts for it, and I have a group that wants to go through. We have a couple cut scenes for when we started. I haven't actually finished the cobblestone for those, but those could be done in a night or two. So we're planning on doing the first Lego D&D game in about a week, and I'm hoping it goes well, and I'm hoping it's just a fun time. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of some constraints with Lego D&D versus just free imagination. But especially for like younger kids or people that have done a lot of D&D, I think the novelty of doing it with Legos would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the modular system you've designed here is fantastic. So this is a really great layout. It'll be great to see how it all runs when you're actually playing through it. I'm sure it'll be a ton of fun.
Yeah, I think so. You might actually run a game without the curtain wall around the town, just so you can move things off and see in a little bit easier if you had a bunch of people sitting around the table. As far as this event goes, this wasn't really meant to be kind of a hardcore display piece where you can see everything and it's just amazing, because you guys are the only ones that got to see the entire dungeon getting taken apart, except for apparently the blacksmith, who is still stubbornly sitting in his way. So here you have a good idea of kind of how the layout goes, and you could pick one of these things up and you could move the whole thing around if you wanted. If I could do it all over again, I might just stick to 32 by 32s instead of these bigger ones, but I started doing the bigger ones, and then I was committed. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, the whole thing looks great. I'm glad that you were able to include so much playability and everything. So thanks for bringing this out to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to show us everything. I know it's a lot of effort to set this all up.
Oh, no, sure. I appreciate you guys coming over, and hopefully if anybody else has had the same idea, this might give them a starting point to how D&D might work for Legos. I think that's a huge challenge for a lot of people, just because you can build one thing and it's good for one scene, and it's like, well, that took 8 months. Whereas the purpose of this design is to be able to do 100 different games and still have replay value. So you're still buying things and you're still getting figures and monsters and different things, but you can reuse the same format for a lot.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking us through the layout here.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.